So let's go to page 108 if you happen to have your book with you this evening. If you don't, that's fine. We'll get you on the screen. You'll be able to see what's going on. So page 108, get the thing all going here. All right. What are we doing here? All right, there it is. Come on. There we go. I guess I'm hitting two buttons at once. It's acting strange and going where I don't want it to go. So we're continuing to deal with contentment, and we're looking at Proverbs chapter 30, verses 8 and 9. It's right there at the very top of page 108. And so we're going to answer this question: what danger may await the wealthy? Let me get something out of the screen here. All right, that's a good spot for you. Very good. Little boxes I can move around, so I moved it. Proverbs 30, verse 8 says, "Remove far from me falsehood and lying. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me, lest I be full and deny you and say, 'Who is the Lord?'" Who is Yahweh? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God. So the question again, what danger may await the wealthy? And that is to be so full, have so many things, that you deny Yahweh, you deny God. That would be a pretty bad thing, wouldn't it? God doesn't normally give us more than he knows we can handle. If we wonder why we just scrape by, that might be one of the reasons. Because he knows we can't handle much more. And the other side of that, what's the danger for the poor, is stealing and profaning the name of God by the stealing, not as in a language issue, but rather not depending upon God, and so stealing. You see, both of these represent an unbiblical focus on things. The one is to be so full, you're like that rich man who said, "Soul, take your ease, eat, drink, be merry, tear down my barns, build bigger barns," and had no thought for God. And what was the response from heaven? "You fool, this night your soul will be required of you." But it is also an unbiblical focus on goods to think that because you don't have certain things, that therefore stealing is a viable option. Both individuals are focused on things rather than God. Now, is it possible to be a rich person and not be out of focus biblically? Yes, it is. Is it possible to be a poor individual and not be out of focus biblically? Yes, it is. And that's where contentment is. It doesn't really matter whether we have in this world's eyes much or little. We can still have the same perspective about things. And that is, things are just things. They're not the goal of life. We shouldn't live for things. And when we do, when we start coveting what we don't have and making all sorts of plans to shortcut one thing, the old expression, robbing Peter to pay Paul, the old idea of, you hear all these advertisements, you deserve whatever it is, a many $1,000 vacation, or who knows what toy this world has to offer. They offer so many of them, that different ones of them appeal to different ones of us. But we shouldn't be focused on the things. In contrast to that, we have here Proverbs 22, verse 2. What does it say that the rich and poor have in common? Who knows before we put the verse on the screen? The rich and the poor meet together. Yahweh is the maker of them all. That's an important thing to keep in mind, because the poor tend to put the rich on some sort of pedestal or put them down because they're angry and bitter, envious. And the rich tend to look down upon those who don't have what they have. And what both need to remember is that God is the creator of both. And God gives us the lot in life that he chooses to give us to help us depend upon him. If you never had to worry about anything in life financially and so forth, would you pray as much as you do? That's always a good question, isn't it? God keeps us humble, keeps us needing certain things so that we understand that the things aren't really what we need. We can live without them. So that moves us then to the main heading there on page 108. Christians should be, it says will be, content in our circumstances. That is the goal. That's what's in front of us, all right? But we're quickly mentioning here the need to remind ourselves about the situation in which Job found himself. What were the difficulties of Job in Job chapter 1? I chose not to put the reading up. Just let's go back through. What happened to Job? Well, he lost everything is one way to say it. What did that everything consist of? His children. What else? I'm sorry? Possessions, his wealth, his health eventually. In chapter 1, it's the loss of flocks and herds, the death of his children. That's what happens there. And the flocks and herds, of course, represent their wealth. Sorry about that, Mohan. Glad you all could be here. So that would be a really rough situation. And this happened, Scripture says, all in one day. It was just one bad bit of news after the other. A servant, I only am left to tell you. You know, that was the theme of the day. And one by one, he was informed of each of these disasters. And here's the interesting thing we need to keep in perspective. How did those things happen? Who allowed those things to happen to Job? God did. Who did those things to Job? Satan did. God sometimes takes an active hand to bring what we would consider bad things to pass in our lives. Excuse me. And God doesn't apologize for that one, he does. But in the case of Job, he allowed Satan to touch his protected servant. Was Job protected by God up to this point, as Satan accused and alleged? Absolutely he was. And we can be thankful for the protection of God. When that's missing, we suffer. But God does not always allow that protection to remain. There are different circumstances in which he allows that to happen. But notice here Job's reaction to all of this, starting at Job 1, verse 20. Then Job arose, tore his robe, and shaved his head, and fell on the ground, and what? Worshipped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. Yahweh gave, and Yahweh has taken away. Blessed be the name of Yahweh. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. How many other individuals claiming to know the Lord in similar situations of life find themselves more in line with Job's wife than Job himself? Her response is curse God and die when he gets afflicted with the boils after all of this happens in the following chapter. But it's Job's faith that shines through in the midst of this disaster, isn't it? And that's what should shine through for us as well. And it's not that, if you go on and read the book of Job, does Job ever get a bit bitter about his circumstance? Yeah, he does. He's very human. The more it goes on and the more he has these supposed friends around him, the harder it gets for him to retain perspective. And yet, of all of them, Job is the one that God does not, God tells Job to intercede for his friends. Job had to be corrected by God. God made the correction by the method of asking him a bunch of questions that Job had no answer for. Great questions. When we get a little bit too high-minded, God has a way of sending those questions. Reread those where God speaks to Job at the end of the book, and remind yourself that you don't know those things either. God is showing his superior wisdom. So on then to Psalm 73. Here's another person in Scripture. Asaph is the writer of this psalm, and he is concerned about the wicked and the way in which they live their lives. Here are some of the excerpts from this section of Scripture in verses 3 through 9. Asaph describes the wicked as arrogant. Know any people like that? Prosperous. They don't seem to suffer at all until they're at the point of death. They're fat and healthy. And remember that fat is one of those things in the old dispensation that was considered a mark of prosperity. So everyone wanted to be fat and few could afford it. They stayed out of trouble. Trouble didn't visit them, didn't come calling. They weren't afflicted. They were proud. They were violent. They were foolish. They were blasphemous. And yet what? You know, you can see a lot of people like this, and at least if they get their comeuppance, you can be a little bit smug, right? But that wasn't the case. Notice verse 12. Behold, these are the wicked, like he's just described. Always at ease, they increase in riches. Why do you think this bothered Asaph? Why was Asaph bothered by the wicked being like this, as he describes them? Does he describe accurately? To some extent. Whenever we just sort of, paint everything right across the board, one color, we're going to end up distorting the actual facts. But he's not far off from what we could also observe in our day. Why did that bother Asaph, or why might that bother you? Just say it out. Go ahead. Sing it out. We don't think it's fair. What do we mean by fair? Yeah, where's God in all of this? Why isn't God setting the wicked straight and making the righteous prosperous so that the wicked will want to be righteous? See that Asaph is just thinking, why are the wicked better off than the righteous? What's going on here? Before we look at anything else that might explain it from this chapter here, what do you think? What's the reason behind that? Is that an accurate assessment? That sometimes the wicked, many times, the wicked are better off than the righteous? Some things never change, exactly.
It almost sounds like you're going to say it, and that is, if we receive rewards for obeying God, then you get people that start playing the game. They're, like, well, I'm going to do this and this so that I can be prosperous and all that.
Okay.
Is that the reason we're supposed to do right, just so that we can prosper?
That's an interesting way of looking at it, that the afflictions of the righteous are a test if righteousness is really what you want. Because if wickedness is the way to get ahead in this world, and it's perceived to be that way, isn't it? Why go to church? I'm going to be expected to put money in the offering plate. And by the end of a year, I'm going to be out a couple $1,000s if I really put money into the offering plate. I mean, like they talk about in church. And is that not something that makes some people think, I don't really need this church stuff? Of course it is. And then there are the matter of the wicked being well off. All right, what's another observation, Joe?
Jesus on earth, he said, love your enemies, and he typically are your enemies.
Okay, loving your enemies being a command. All right, what else? Who else has an idea? Something very obvious about this whole equation we're talking about. Will it always be this way? Larry?
I think God says put your treasures in heaven, not here on earth.
Okay? Put your treasures in heaven, not here on earth. Why?
The system's broke, it's a sin-filled world, it's gonna
Okay?
pass away.
Yeah, this world is going to pass away. It's not going to last forever. And on the other side, eternity will. So the records are going to be righted. It's just that for now, sometimes it requires us to be patient. So here's the question, and then I'll put the verse on the screen. How did he, Asaph, view his obedience at first? Okay, so verse 13. All in vain have I kept my heart clean and washed my hands in innocence. So what's he saying about obedience? It's a waste of time. If you're only talking about this life, it's vain, it's useless, it's pointless to live an upright life, a moral life, an honest life. It's more, you get ahead further doing the other stuff. So says the world. And so at times may we agree in principle. Here's another question. When did that attitude change for Asaph? Yeah, verse 17. Until I went into the sanctuary of God, then I discerned their end. When he started thinking biblically, we could say, at God's sanctuary, being reminded of the presence of God with his people, then he started to think correctly. We could say something like, when I started reading Scripture. You realize that Asaph is writing at a time when people didn't walk around. They didn't even go up to the tabernacle or temple with a copy of Scripture in their hands. Just, you couldn't do that. The average person couldn't get a hold of it. They walked up with what they had in their mind. And the idea is there at the sanctuary of God, there was an opportunity for teaching. And perhaps someone was teaching and he hears something he needs to hear regarding this whole situation. And so that brings about a change. Notice how his perspective is changed by the end of the psalm. Verse 25, whom have I in heaven but you? And there is nothing on earth that I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. That's a huge shift from where he started out, right? Envying the wicked rich. He gets his heart right, and then he comes to realize where his treasure is. Where's his treasure? In God. Whom have I in heaven but you, and there is nothing on earth that I desire besides you. That's an amazing statement. So, how did Asaph's relationship with God teach him contentment? Well, you can put it this way. Got to the point where God was all he really desired. He stopped desiring the wealth of the wicked. He stopped envying their lot in life. God was all he desired in heaven and on earth, and God was his heart's strength and inheritance forever. Do you think of God that way? Do you think of God as your source of strength and your inheritance forever? If you never have any appreciable amount of this world's goods, but you have God, is that enough? I'm not saying should it be enough. I'm asking you, is it enough for you? And that's a question each one of us is going to have to face. And that we will face repeatedly. It's not something that you just settle one time and it's done. Our hearts are perverse. They will constantly migrate away from God if we allow it. You can make a profession of faith, and many people have, and end up living like the world. And I think it circles back to this very thing, a lack of understanding that God is enough in every circumstance of life. God is truly all I need. Because without God, what do I have? I have nothing, though I have the riches of the entire earth. I can't hang on to them. Because of death, because of illness. Think of how many rich people get an illness that science cannot deal with. And they languish despite their riches, unable to enjoy what they have because of the frailty of human existence. If you have everything and you don't have God, you have nothing. If you have nothing and yet have God, you have everything. Now that is just a mere platitude if it doesn't sink into the depths of your heart and become your heartbeat. If there's anything else, and there's a lot of stuff out there. There are a lot of things to draw our eyes away. If Demas forsook Paul and consequently Christ because he loved the present world, which is today represented in museums by stuff that we look at and just scratch our heads and say, why would anyone live for that? Clay pots, trinkets. I mean, hey, they didn't even have cell phones. Miserable existence, right? Except when you're sitting down to study and you keep getting phone calls that you don't want. They're, people that don't know you, they're just calling to try to get you to follow their scam. Each of us has the opportunity to follow the footsteps of Asaph or to follow the steps of Demas. We know what the right answer is. And I could do what I hear preachers do in different places. Repeat after me, and you could say the words, and it still wouldn't change what you think. You got to get like Asaph to the point of just making a choice and sticking with that choice. And every time the choice comes up again, and it will, life's tests never are passed and done. They always are coming back. Whether you pass them or fail them, but especially if you fail them, it's coming back. Okay? Philippians 4, verse 11, we've looked at this several times through our study here. Philippians 4:11, we're now on page 109, in case it matters. Paul says, not that I speak of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I have learned to be content no matter what is going on in my life. And we've gone over this. Where is Paul as he writes the book of Philippians? He's in jail. Someone said as soon as Paul arrived in town, he always sought out the nearest jail to see what the accommodations would be like. That's kind of accurate, isn't it? He was either in jail or running for his life many times. He's in jail. And what's Paul's situation in jail? Is he rich or poor? He's poor. Because if he were rich, he wouldn't have been in jail. He could have bought his way out. And he would have been expected to by bribes. But, I say expected, by Rome. And if he refused, Rome would have taken his riches and left him languish. No big deal. But Paul could say, despite the fact that he's in jail, doesn't have common necessities provided for him in most cases, he said, I don't feel need. I don't feel like I need to complain about my lot. I'm content. This is where God has me. And what was Paul doing with his time when he was there in jail? Writing letters, encouraging people like Philemon, or not Philemon, but Onesimus, who came and found him. I don't know if Onesimus found him in visitors' hours or if Onesimus got chucked in jail too. It's always an interesting question. But not only was he doing that, he was also witnessing to the soldiers who were chained to him or standing guard over him. And he says as a result of his imprisonment that the entire Praetorian Guard had heard the gospel because of his imprisonment. And so Paul says, I rejoice that the gospel is being preached. It doesn't bother me that I'm in jail. Because I've learned, regardless what my circumstances, to be content, to be satisfied. What God has given me is what I need, and I don't want anything else. Now, when the gift from the Philippians came, did he send it back? No. Because he really did have need. He just wasn't thinking about it that way. He was thinking of his needs more as opportunities for God to show his faithfulness. And that was enough. So, in what circumstances was Paul content? How would you describe that? All of them, but especially when he had need. In every circumstance of life, but especially when he had need. Verse 12, I know how to be brought low financially. Just not having anything. And I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. So, that word, again, I have learned. What do you suppose that word implies? What does that word imply? If Paul says, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger and so forth. Joe?
In the past, he wasn't satisfied.
In the past, he was not satisfied. This word presupposes experience that teaches the lesson. Life is all about lessons. You're always learning everything you ever learn by experience. But you can borrow experience. I learned from many people that doing drugs is a bad idea. Never tried them in my life. Never considered it. Why? Because I saw the bad results in other people's lives. I've seen what it does. And you could go on down the line for drunkenness and immorality and whatever this world has to offer. Can you look around and see other people that have thought this is something to live for and have ruined their lives because it was the wrong thing? Yeah, you can see it everywhere. In fact, it's what the news is about. Almost every time you hear it. So you can learn from that. And you don't have to go through the experience yourself. But contentment is one of those things that each of us is going to have to learn by our own personal experience. I cannot borrow your contentment, nor you mine. Because the sad fact is that two people can be in exactly the same circumstance, and one of them is content and the other is not. And it's not a difference of circumstance. It's a difference of heart. So you will have to learn that lesson as I will have to on a regular basis. So the question is asked, what was he exposed to? And here in the verse we have several things. We have plenty and hunger. Yeah, life's not always bad. Sometimes there are good things. Abundance and need. These are things that he was exposed to. He's not giving us the particulars. He does in other passages of Scripture. For instance, 2 Corinthians. He has a rather extended passage where he goes through all of these things he's been through for the cause of Christ. And yet he learned to be content. You and I are exposed to different circumstances, though we all have similarity between those circumstances, don't we? So we will have to learn our contentment, and a good place to start, an essential place to start, is with Scripture. 2 Corinthians 12, verse 10. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weakness, insults, hardships, persecutions. That's this list I was talking about. Calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. For the sake of Christ, I am content with all of these things. So what was he content with? Well, it's listed right there. We'll just underline it, okay? With all of these things that we've already read, and most of them are negative. In fact, they all are. And yet, he's content. If your life right now were to be described primarily in these terms, weakness, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities falling upon your shoulders, would you be content? That's a big ask, isn't it? And we might think, well, God, I might be content if my situation wasn't this bad. Wrong perspective, wrong answer. If my life were just as good as so-and-so's, isn't that neat how we just always look at somebody else and we can find somebody else that has it all together. And then sometimes we get to know that other person and we find out they don't have it together. I was just looking at something recently, and it was somebody in the world. It wasn't even a believer. And they were making the observation, not in so many words, but basically, when you see people around you just flaunting their wealth, new cars all the time, really nice clothes, and got their house looking the best, they're always remodeling something or whatever, just people that you might envy. He says, what you might want to consider is how many of them are actually dead flat broke. They're so far in debt, they don't really have a prayer of getting out of it, humanly speaking. I don't know about you. I don't want to live like that. I'd rather live much more simply. I'm content with my 2 cars. I have no desire to buy another car. The only way I will buy another car is if one of them gets wrecked, the engine blows up, and it is not repairable. I have no desire to have a car payment. Not at all. I like my little puddle jumper with the crank windows and the locks you got to pull up on each individual door. I like that. I just hope nobody runs into me and messes it up. But I'm saying I'm content with my cars, okay? I have other areas I need to work on contentment. I'm not presenting myself as a paragon in this area. I'm just using that illustration, all right? You in your life will have to look at what are the issues in which you have learned to be content, and what are the ways in which you still need to learn that? We all have things to work on, don't we? Here's another question based on the same verse. Why was Paul content? Why was he content? Exactly. For the sake of Christ. Because of his relationship with Jesus Christ. Paul understood that the foundation stone of his contentment was his salvation. Do you see your salvation that way? As something that brings you as the cornerstone, the bedrock, the foundation of contentment. Because I have Christ, then a lot of things don't matter. That matter just out of all bounds and limits for other people in the world. Why are other people hugely in debt, drowning in debt? They haven't learned contentment in those areas where they just feel like they have to spend money. What is the reaction of the average person when they have a lot of debt? Why do they have that debt according to them? I just don't earn enough. And yet, if they start earning more, if they get a significant increase in pay, nothing changes. In fact, it gets worse because now their borrowing potential has increased. Contentment is a very important lesson, and it's a life skill that really, if you don't have it, you need it. We all need to grow in it. But he's content for the sake of Christ. This is something that Scripture does continually. Regardless what the problem is in life, it directs us back to a spiritual cause of the problem or solution to the problem. Is that accurate, do you think? When someone comes and asks us advice or tells us of a problem that they have in life, virtually every time it can be traced back to a spiritual need. See, God allows the situations of life to happen to us to push us to Him. We have that option. We can run to Christ for the help that we need. All right, well, we're going to have to stop there. It's a good place to stop anyway. So let me discontinue the screen share without disrupting the link.